What gets you breached? It's not the risks you formally accept, it's the assumptions you unconsciously make. Today, we're flipping the script from assumption of risk to the risks of assumption. Let's get started. Hey, welcome back from the break, folks. It's Tom, your host for today's virtual conference. Up next, we have Courtney Hans. She is the VP of Cyber Services over at AmTrust Financial. She's also out of our Seattle area, part of the advisory council up there. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank
I've
you.
had the privilege of chatting with Courtney for a little bit behind the scenes, right? So we were having fun this morning already. But I want to turn things over. We're going to be talking about the assumption of risk or the risks of assumption. And of course, I just can't help myself, but I have to say, you know what happens when we assume. So over to
That's
Courtney
absolutely right.
for more. So thank you for being here. Over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we know we're going to keep this broadcast safe for work, so we won't go there. But I
I
think we
love
all
it.
know the answer to that. Yeah. So thank you so much. And we'll dive right in. Thanks for joining us today. In our industry, we talk a lot about the assumption of risk, right? It's central to so many conversations that we have: risk mitigation, risk transfer, risk management, etc. Obviously, extremely important things for us in our industry. But today we're going to talk about something that is equally, if not arguably, more important, and that's the risk of assumptions. And in today's political climate, and we're not going to make this a political conversation today, but there are a lot of other risks in those assumptions too. So you might be thinking those in the background, but that's not where we're going today. We're going about assumptions and how they can stymie our work in the workplace. Okay. So we'll dive right in here. Let me give a little introduction about myself with a kind of blurry picture from my past. This may or may not have been before phone cameras and digital cameras were pretty ubiquitous. So this is me some years past, we'll just say, in one of my first roles out of college as an adventure travel guide for Backroads Active Travel. I spent a good amount of time doing that. Right out of college, I was given the keys to a van and a company credit card and told to go make magic on worldwide adventure trips for, let's call them, very type A individuals. Fantastic company. If you're interested in adventure travel, I highly recommend you look them up, Backroads Active Travel. But I learned a lot, and hindsight's 2020, right? As I've developed my security career, I've really looked back at a lot of the lessons that I learned as a guide across the world, learning how to synthesize massive amounts of information and spit it back out in a digestible, relatable, understandable format, managing crises and keeping a calm head. And maybe most importantly for today, learning how to take my ideas and goals and make other folks feel like they are part of that process. They are creating their own goals, and that my ideas morph into their ideas so we get some action out of that. That's going to be relevant in what we talk about today. After I spent a while traveling the world, I went back and got my MBA to do about a decade of what my kids would call business. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I pivoted into the security world and had entered that as the first security hire for a rapid growth startup company. Took on the role of the first security hire, built out the IT and security functions. And anyone that's ever been at a startup, and give me a little shout out in the comments there. If you've been at a startup, you know that a lot of that energy is wearing all the hats, which can be exhausting, but also incredible experience. So I was responsible for everything from GRC to application security, executive risk management, and so on and so forth. And finally, to bring us up to today, as of about a year and a half, a little bit under 2 years now, I have been, as Tom said, at AmTrust Financial with the cyber insurance division. But I don't deal in insurance. I actually work with our cyber insurance policyholders to help them strengthen their security posture. So today I'm really serving as a security consultant in many ways, shapes, and forms. And that also brings us into today's topics, is learning more about these companies and how it can help them. Context is king. Before I switch on to the next slide, though, I do want to tell you a quick guiding story that's also relevant today. First year on the bike, so to speak, was biking along, first day of a trip in pretty hilly terrain. And I come across a woman who has stopped with her husband, and she looks to be in some mild distress. and she's breathing pretty heavily. And she looks at me wide-eyed and says, "I'm having trouble breathing." All my medical experience like kicks in, and I'm thinking, okay, ABC, we have an airway issue, breathing issue. Who do I need to call? We all pause and take a beat. And she goes on to continue with, "I'm just not getting enough air through my nose." So what was happening truly was not a breathing issue or an airway issue or a circulation issue even, but really just someone who maybe hadn't done a lot of exercise in the past and was feeling what we all feel when we're putting our body through the paces. They were having to breathe very heavily to feel like they were getting enough oxygen. So my moments of panic quickly assuaged, and I was like, oh, okay, now I see where she's coming from. I can bring her down from this ledge. But I made an assumption in those first initial seconds that we had a serious emergency that turned out not to be the case. And with that, we'll dive into our topic today. I know everyone on this call probably has a pretty good handle on what the definition of assumption is. And again, we all know what Tom was hearkening at with, when you assume, you know what happens. Again, in our industry, we focus a lot on the second definition here, the action of taking on power responsibility. Tons of conversations out there about who owns the risk. Does the CISO own the risk? Does the CFO? Does the business? Who owns this risk? That's certainly important, but we're going to focus on the first definition here. Something that we accept as true or certain to happen without any proof, right? Something that we accept as true without truly knowing. And when we do this, we stymie our ability to be effective. We may corrupt message and purpose. We can make assumptions about other folks' understanding or their meaning or their goals. And this is where we can find ourselves getting into trouble. Technical skills are, of course, incredibly important in our industry, but the communication skills, again, conversation that's been bubbling up for a number of years now, cannot be brushed aside. They are critical and paramount to effective implementation of our security work. All right, so heading on in. I want to tell a quick story for those of you that are fans of stand-up comics. And actually, let me pause for a couple seconds here. If you got a favorite stand-up comic, pop it in the comments here, because I'm always looking for new recommendations, especially if they've got something already broadcast on Netflix that I can watch. But Pete Holmes, if you've not heard of him, he does a little bit on telemarketers, and he talks about how telemarketers are seen as such a nuisance, interrupting our daily life, bothering us. If you're like me, you probably just never answer your phone when you don't recognize the number. But this story is from a while back. He's talking about how he'd pick up the landline, and he would see it as an opportunity to find joy in the everyday, which I love. And the story that he tells, and I'm sorry if I'm ruining it, but if you haven't seen it, it's worth watching because he tells it in a lot more funny way than I do. He picks up a phone and immediately starts launching into a crazy voice and crazy words, and he's going to take up some of this telemarketer's time and have some fun. He goes on and on and on for, he says, maybe 15, 20 minutes. When the telemarketer finally gets a chance to give a word in edgewise, Pete Holmes is informed that the person calling is in fact somebody from Chase Bank, calling to let him know that his credit card's been stolen. So Pete immediately has, the figurative egg on his face and is trying to walk back the crazy voice and thank the person for calling. He clearly made a low stakes, in this case, assumption, because he got to the truth eventually, but it took a lot longer than had he actually checked his assumption at the door and inquired about the reason for the call. So that's just something that I think about. That's a super funny example. Of course, there are assumptions that go a very different way and get people in trouble and, tank projects, for example. So while we're on that subject, I want y'all to think about playing telephone as a kid. And when I give a talk like this in person, I often will have folks stand up and play a game of telephone with us, right? It's a great way to shake off some energy, maybe move around a little bit after lunch. We're virtual, so we're going to play it out on screen. I know we've got a financial audience here, so we'll start with the phrase assets equal liability plus equity, probably something we're all familiar with. As each person intakes this message, it changes a little bit, right? So that's due to a couple things. We all have our own internal filters. Maybe it's loud, there's other distractions going on. Not so dissimilar to a work environment, right? Somebody's telling us something, but we've got 5 other things on our plate. Maybe we're only half listening. Maybe we can't understand them because they're also distracted. For whatever reason, the message gets a little bit distorted. And as we keep going through iterations, multiple people, we can see it. Something like assets equal liability plus equity morphs into acid eats reality, but they quit tweeting. And the end recipient is left with a crazy message that means no sense to them, like acid eats royalty butter quit tweeting. So yeah, so if you take a minute and think about when you were a kid, when you played this, how silly it was, and how sometimes that message went through pretty good. It was almost never 100%, but sometimes that message was so distinctly different from the starting message that there was almost zero connection. The same thing happens in the workplace, right? It's human nature. And sometimes we've got a situation where not just the message gets distorted, but there's meaning distortion, right? Again, everyone sort of inserts their own agenda into the message. So in this case, we've got maybe a technical sounding phrase, but as it goes through iterations, it might become a little bit more about personal finance, then maybe more of a metaphor, possibly then a little bit of a philosophical bend, and then it's almost a proverb, right? So the sentiment assets equals liability plus equity all of a sudden morphs into all wealth is debt or legacy, right? It's a different meaning. It's a different maybe call to action, if you will. So think about that and think about when you might have had this situation at work. And I'm going to pause for just a moment. If you're in the chat, give me a quick example of when a project or a communication went sideways because somebody had some serious misunderstandings. While you do that, I'm going to flip slides. But yeah, would love to see anyone that may have had that experience where like this was the message we thought we heard, but upon further investigation, this was the actual message or call to action, or I asked my team to do this and what came out of it was that. Sometimes it's for the better, but a lot of times it doesn't fit the primary objectives. And why do we do that? It's because as human beings, when we only have some of the information, we fill in the gaps. That's just how our brain works. It's physiology, right? We want to have a complete picture. We want to put things in buckets. We want to fill in that gray area when we don't know what should be there. And the truth is, in our industry, there's really a lot of gray area. And there's a lot of stakeholders that we need to work with: peers, direct reports, managers, executives, etc. We don't always get all the information. And we also know, the old adage, don't let perfect be the enemy of progress. I'm not saying that you always need to button down and get 100% of the information out there, but there are many times where pausing and making some inquiries will get you so much further, and it's worth the effort. This is where I like to employ what I would love to consider my superpower, and that's curiosity. And if you're looking for a superpower, I'm happy to share. Take curiosity. I think it's a good one, right? Flying would be great too, but we'll take curiosity for today. So again, physiology, we fill in the gaps. So think about your neighbor. And this could be the neighbor that lives next door to you. This could be the neighbor at your office, maybe the next office over, the next seat over. It could be the neighbor driving their car in the lane next to you on the freeway, right? We make assumptions about people that we see every day. Some of them are incredibly harmless, right? Like I could, Tom and I, like you said, we've been chatting this morning. I don't know what you have for breakfast. I could assume, I could assume that the person I saw on the train didn't have any breakfast because they look really hangry, right? These seem pretty harmless. But then you can have some assumptions like, where did they grow up? And when I first created this slide, that was meant to be a pretty silly little one too. That's taken on a little bit more weight these days too. Where did they grow up? Maybe we'll say that you see somebody wearing a Seattle Seahawks jersey, right? Go Hawks, Seattle area. You might assume that's where they grew up, but maybe just their favorite player that they went to college with ended up on that team. Silly assumptions might have no impact, or they might have a big impact. Other things, what pets do they have? If you've got a dog or a neighbor with a noisy dog, you might know some things, but you might not also know that they have an older senior dog inside that doesn't bark a lot. What is their favorite book, right? So all of these things that were you to find out a little bit more, you might have a more complete picture. When we're dealing with colleagues, when we are working with, say, our chief of marketing or our new team member, we might assume that what drives them is X, when really it's Y, right? When we take the time to get to know folks a little bit more, know about their interests, about their the things they'd like to avoid, we can work with them so much better, okay? So I think about working with different backroads leaders. Every time we were on a trip, we would have 2 leaders, and we would try and dive in and ask, what do you like to do? What rides do you like to do? What picnics do you like to set up? So that we could not make any assumptions. And just as important, when we got a new batch of guests on every trip, 26 people for whom we had to deliver the trip of a lifetime, instead of assuming while they were there, again, maybe it's a trip in the wine country, might assume that they really love wine. Maybe, in fact, they don't like wine at all. Maybe they're completely sober. Maybe they're on that trip because their spouse, their partner, just really wanted to ride amongst some vineyards, right? So instead of assuming, we'd make that ask on the first day. What brought you on this trip? What are you hoping to get out of it? That was key, right? Never wanted to get to the end of a trip and find out that somebody was really hoping to see or do X, Y, or Z, and they didn't get to do it because we didn't know, right? The time to help deliver on objectives is when there's still that runway, and you've got to ask those questions first to know what they are. In my current role, working with everyone from the very small single practitioner healthcare office to the large multinational global hospitality company with tens of thousands of employees, it's really easy to make assumptions about which one of those organizations would be super buttoned up, have a really strong security team and all the tooling, and which one might not have anything in place or even know what multi-factor authentication is. But as you can imagine, you would be surprised. These assumptions don't carry any weight going into these conversations. And every time I enter an engagement, it starts with learning their context, their goals, and their concerns. So here's maybe a slightly sillier example. So again, quick pause to see in the comments, who here plays Wordle? I'm a huge Wordle fan. I think my streak right now, and I don't mean to brag, but maybe this is a brag, it's like 560 right now, and I play on hard mode. It gets competitive in my family. But I don't know if anyone remembers this particular Wordle. It was back in 2022. This is not my screenshot. I pulled it off the interwebs. But this had, I think, one of the highest failure rates to date on Wordle. It's been eclipsed now, but this one was Wordle 265, I think. There was a 20% failure rate. And as you can see, even though this person had 80% of the information by guess 2, they still didn't get across the finish line, right? And that is the truth. Sometimes 80% is not enough to deliver on what's necessary. Again, not telling you to park the premise of, progress over perfection. Sometimes you got to go that way. But in this case, it's a great and silly illustration about how 80% doesn't cut it sometimes, right? Just like in security, you can be 80% secure. Those threat actors will find a way to exploit that 20%. But that said, if you were 100% secure, you're probably just telling yourself a bedtime story. So what else can we look at with Wordle? When you make these assumptions, you find yourself in a bit of a pickle. So in the comments, go ahead and tell me first when to guess what that movie's from. I know I've got some folks that spotted it right away. But when we are doing, say, a risk-based gap analysis, none of these things exist in a vacuum. We've got to, like I said, with the folks that I talk to via my current role, we've got to understand their context, their nuance. We're not going to come in and say, you should do X, Y, and Z. It may not make sense in their environment. If you're coming in and having a conversation with, say, marketing or sales, you've got to remember they've got their own objectives. They've got their own maybe OKRs that they're working on. They've got their own goals, right? So when you jump to conclusions, you are stymieing their agenda. In fact, you're stymieing yours as well, because they will look at you as a blocker. So instead of jumping to conclusions, get curious. What would you say you do here? Learn the business first. I know this is a topic of conversation in our circles now too, and I just want to pause and give you my vote of confidence on why this is so important. Security does not exist in a vacuum. I know I already said it, and I'll say it 5 more times before we finish, because it's true. If the business fails, we don't have jobs. If we button down everything, the business won't be able to operate. That's part of that acceptance of risk, right? So when we're assuming what other people need out of their engagements with us, we are destroying all of our agendas. When we ask, however, we might learn that what worries them, what keeps them up at night, is something we didn't even think about, or something that's not even on their minds is something that keeps us up at night. I don't know if anyone remembers this poem. It became a song as well. But the quote, I know you can read it, but I'm going to read it out loud. The real troubles in your life are apt to be things that never crossed your worried mind, the kind that blindsides you at 4 p.m. on some idle Tuesday, right? Maybe somebody believes, we've got robust security protocols in place. We're not vulnerable to data breaches, or our employees are trustworthy. We don't need to worry about insider threats. But people are going to people. Maybe you assumed that your colleague was on a project. Maybe you assumed that the CEO understood what you were telling them about the risk of going with plan X versus plan Y. Take the time to check understanding. There's interpersonal gap. We saw it with the telephone example, and it exists every day. The trouble starts when people are unaware, and we increase our knowledge and awareness of what's going on across our company when we have these cross-functional conversations. So get to know these folks. I know a lot of people are working fully remote. I am. I love it. Some people are working in office partially or fully. But take the time. You can do it either way. I'm a big proponent of making time for personal connection, even in a remote workforce. Might be a little bit easier in the office, and that is something to do. Find out what motivates them from both a personal and a professional lens, right? And then use those things to have real conversations about how you can help them. So I want to give a little example here. This painting is called The Oracle by Camilla Miola. It was painted in 1880. And for those of you that don't know the story about the Oracle of Delphi, this is, I don't know, I see a lot of parallels myself in the security world in inaccessible language maybe, and confusing concepts to people that aren't in our industry. But to take a step back, the Oracle of Delphi, the priestess, was someone who would go into a trance, and the supplicants, these folks in the bottom right there, would come looking for predictions, advice, prognostications, so that they could decide, are they going to make this investment or plant this crop or start this war? And the Pythia, after getting some offerings and eating some special food and going into a trance, which may or may not have been caused by some gases in the basement of the temple, would then spit forth a prophecy, but it wasn't in plain, understandable language. It had to be interpreted by the folks, the priests and the officiants that are near her. So those are those 5 gentlemen there sitting next to the priestess. So they would take her sort of gibberish, or sounded like gibberish to the common person, and interpret it, but in very vague ways that still left the supplicants with the opportunity to interpret it in a myriad of ways. And I think you can see where I'm going with this. This is something that we see in the security world. We give a fancy presentation, we pull up charts, we talk about vulnerabilities, we talk about threat actor motivations and threat actor groups and different technical ways to exploit a vulnerability. But are we speaking to our audience? Are we speaking their language? Are we telling them what it means for them in their context? So when I'm dealing with our small business owners or even large business executives from a consultation standpoint, I need to consider what is resonant to them. What language do they speak, right? Are they in finance? Can I give them an analogy that speaks to what they know, to what they understand? Are they in marketing or in the digital landscape, right? Think about what your audience's baseline understanding is. Think about where they know how to go deep, and make an analogy that speaks to them, pulls at their heartstrings if you want, and has an emotional and visceral connection for them. That's how you're going to get results. The Oracle was popular for, I think, 4 centuries BC, until people started to recognize that this actually wasn't helpful. If security becomes a roadblock, we know people will start to move around us. So be on the same team. This analogy I like a bit. So think about if you've ever visited any national parks. Again, if you'd like to pop a comment in, pop your favorite national park in the comments here. Mine is Yosemite. You've noticed that if you're in bear country, you're going to see trash cans that look a little bit like this. And maybe not as relevant to what I'm talking about today, but the quote I love is, there's considerable overlap between the intelligence of the smartest bears and the dumbest tourists. So when you are implementing security controls or talking about the risk, think about what the overlap or disconnect is between user objectives, right? Your goal as a security professional is to safeguard the business. But your marketing goal, for example, might be to get as much outreach as possible, make things as easy as possible to go through the process. I think about at my old role at the software startup, where we had our SOC 2 report, and our sales team wanted to spread it far and wide. They wanted to give it to anybody who might even think about possibly wanting to glance at it. And those of you that have worked on SOC 2 reports, you know, there's got some sensitive information in there. I wanted that NDA in place before they were able to share. And that was in a bit of conflict with the sales team wanting to move fast and make sure that everything was going as quickly as possible so they could close that sale. These things aren't insurmountable, of course, right? There's always the SOC 3 report, scrubbed a little bit, meant for wider distribution. But think about the disconnect or possible overlap between your users, between your stakeholders, what they need, what you need, and how can you find compromise or that Venn diagram overlap. Because in this case, right, that tourists want somewhere to throw away their trash. Park maintenance folks want to have a consolidated place for trash that is not accessible by bears. Bears just want to eat the trash. This trash can was born. It solves all the problems, even though there's a little bit of more work involved for people going to throw their trash away. Let's see, let's skip back here a little bit. There we go. Here we go. Who's setting the agenda, right? Agendas can stifle innovation and suppress concerns, right? If you come in with your security person agenda and you're running the show and you don't give folks a chance to inform that agenda, you're not going to get very far. We love parameters, right? That's why artists paint on canvas. That's why we have some sort of white paper margins, right? To set our prose on the paper. We need some parameters, but we need the room for creativity. If you come in setting your agenda, it looks binary, right? So people can either hop on your train or not. But when you come in and you build a collective agenda with your stakeholders, with your team, with your manager, everybody has a chance for input. And that's where you can build solutions that address everybody's needs, right? Those overlapping needs and concerns. So make space when you are coming in and having these conversations. Ask first, what are you looking to accomplish? How can I help you? Because security is a resource for the business, right? Again, we do not exist in a vacuum. We've often been seen as administrative overhead, roadblocks, the people that say no. But I would argue that security can and arguably should be part of a growth strategy. Increasingly, we are seeing more regulations. We are seeing customers, B2B customers take more care and pay more attention to their vendor partnerships and their security controls. There will be a time where you lose business because you can't demonstrate a pillar of trust. So be that person, be that enabler, be the artist that holds up the canvas for your new painter to learn how to paint on, right? Help them accomplish their goals and be a partner. Sit on the same side of the table, not the other side. We hire people to help us answer questions that we are unable to answer ourselves. That's what they're looking for you to do, okay? Advise, consult, be a partner. Fun facts, in one of my other previous careers, I was also a whitewater raft guide, right? Overlapped a little bit with my adventure travel guiding. And it's a great illustration, it's just like this visual, on how to align everybody going the same direction, right? Like everybody's going down the river. The guide's primary responsibility is safety, right? You can see everybody's got their life jackets or their PFDs, personal flotation devices on. That's the guide's primary goal. But if you were to ask the customers what they remembered about the guide, they're going to remember the fun stories. They're going to remember that he took them right through the middle of that fun wave and they got splashed and it was exciting, it was exhilarating. They're not necessarily going to focus on or report out first that he got us safely down the river. But that is his primary objective, and it will eclipse every other objective. We know that as security professionals, our goal, again, is to safeguard the business. And that's great subtext, and that's great as our primary goal. But when you interact with other folks, think about the message, the vibe, if you will, that you leave in those rooms and from those conversations. You want folks thinking, oh yeah, bring in security early, bring them often. They're great problem solvers. They can help us figure out a way to do what we want to do in a way that supports the business, okay? Your role is a guide, just like this gentleman here. It doesn't absolve all your users or your crew here from their responsibility in getting safely down the river and in participating and making their own fun and their own safe choices. And with that, I'd just like to say, if you've ever been on the river, know that you're supposed to be holding onto your T-grip. That's that end of the paddle there. The only person holding onto their T-grip is the guide. Why? Because that can smack somebody in the face. So just an analogy there. They need to know that they are also responsible. Security is everybody's responsibility, but leave them with the right vibe so that they will continue wanting to work with you. And with that, I'm going to leave you with one final analogy, because if you haven't figured out by now, that is how I like to communicate. Security is a blueprint. Be involved in projects early on. We like to say shift security left. This is what that looks like. Think about if you were building a home. You would definitely want to know where your bathroom was going to be, your kitchen. You've got to have the plumbing set up. If you start, pouring the foundation first without actually looking at what you want the final product to be, you're going to make some poor choices. Doesn't mean they're irrecoverable, but it's going to be a lot more time, expense, and frustration to go back and architect things the right way from your foundation. That's what we are. We should be part of the foundation. When you communicate effectively, when you understand what the final product wants to look like, you know that your executive team wants to do X, Y, and Z. You know that the marketing team is being held to this objective or this goal or this number. You can come in and support at the very beginning. But you can't do that if you are alienating folks, speaking a language they don't understand, or assuming that they know what you're talking about without a check, right? Be a part of the process. Be a framer, or be in there with the blueprint, be an architect, so that you can draw those plans with them and not come in and try and dig under the kitchen to get the drainage that should have been there when the foundation was poured. All right. With that, that concludes today's chat. I think Tom might have some questions, but I want to remind you, always ask questions. Curiosity can also be your superpower. Challenge your assumptions. Stay curious. Be a partner, and please pop any questions that you have into the comments.
Thanks so much, Courtney. Great job. I wanted to chime in on the park stuff. I was going to go with Jellystone Park, because I was like, and I'm in the background doing my yogi voice too. I'm like, hey, boo boo, don't assume you can snatch the picnic basket without assuming the risk.
That's a perfect voice.
So I was having fun in the background, and I was also like, you guys can't see it in the audience, but I was like typing out to Courtney. I'm like, they're gonna lose teeth if they're not holding that thing right, because that was the big thing I actually remembered, other than having so much fun. And somebody like fell off of our whitewater raft and almost drowned, but he was like a big drama queen about it.
You gotta hold that T-grip.
You gotta hold that thing, or you're gonna lose teeth. I mean, it'll bust your mouth. That being said. I do want to take a more serious stance, though, because people make a lot of assumptions about other things, too. I mean, you kind of touched base on it a little bit. I'm not going to go down the political path, but other cultures. People assume different things about, oh, well, that's, it's an old white guy. He knows everything, or he thinks he knows everything, that kind of stuff. Or, we have these preconceived notions about our developers. They're not going to listen to security because we're going to tell them no all the time, right? So how do you kind of break down those? I guess it's a stereotype is really what it is. How do you break down those kind of stereotypes within an org? It's hard, but what kind of insights do you have?
It is really challenging. And it certainly depends on what kind of environment you're in. When I was in the startup world, one of the things I did was I got in front of almost every new person that joined the organization. Again, that's not always tenable if you're at a super incredibly large organization. But if you can get in and introduce yourself and how you are there to help, set that tone right away, make yourself an approachable person so that people aren't afraid to admit what they don't know. And when that's really helpful in building those relationships. And then, say, for example, working with a developer, as you learn to understand where they're coming from, what their goals are, what their experience is, you can come in and say, hey, how can I help you? Do you need any assistance with this? You feeling pretty good about that? When you come in and you let them know, again, that you're a teammate, right? Not a taskmaster. They're more likely to form a coalition with you and bring you in for things that they don't know, right? So you create that safe space. In my current work, when I come into these organizations, again, I know it carries a little weight. I'm coming in, I'm speaking to them from their insurance provider standpoint, and I'm very clear to tell them, listen, this is what this is and what this isn't. This is not me trying to find holes in your security protocol so we can make adjustments to your policy. This is me coming in to see how I can help you make some good choices that fit within your organizational goals and budget. So when you set that stage there and let them know, hey, I'm on your side, that goes a long way.
Right. Thank you for that. Almost out of time. If nothing else, what should people walk away from this session thinking about, or maybe even start doing next week?
Yeah, I think we're coming into the end of the year now, right? So I'd say as people are starting to talk about plans for next year, right? If your organization is goal setting, talking about, again, OKRs or mission statements, be a part of that conversation. Say, hey, I want to learn. I want to come in and figure out what's important to you so that I can help you get there, right? Don't lead with your agenda. Lead with, I'm on your team. I want to hear what's important to you so I can help. People are, they like to help as well. So that is a time where you can invite people in to help you. And again, like, there are all these psychological tips around there that when someone provides you with help, they feel closer to you. So you can ask small favors. Maybe that's, hey, can I ask you something as you're building out your goals for 2026? It would be really helpful to me if you can share them with me so I can figure out a way to help support you, right? So you're asking them a favor, but you're also flipping the script and saying, I'm asking you this favor so that I can help you. It goes both ways. So that's one of the things I think about coming into the end of year, is setting that up. So as people are thinking about their 2026 plans, they're baking you, your team, your work into their thoughts.
I like it. And I'm guilty of this myself. I don't ask for help when I need it often.
So many of us don't, right? We feel like we have to be our own island.
Well,
but asking help makes people feel, closer to you.
It does. And I always feel good when people help me. It's you got to get past that little thing that's in your head that's like, they're going to think you're dumb. No, they probably have something equally on their side that you are the expert with, right?
That's right. And you enter into this more reciprocal relationship that is beneficial for both.
Exactly. Don't fall into the assumption silo, folks. That's all I can say. That's all I'm going to add. Thank you so much, Courtney. Great job.